Ezra Banks was 39 years old, and the woman he had spent 6 years married to had announced, in front of 4 couples at the dinner table he had built himself and set with his own hands, that she was done waiting for him to become something. She had said it in the middle of the main course. She had said it without hesitation and without apparent cruelty, the particular flatness of a woman who had rehearsed the sentence long enough that it had stopped feeling like a wound and had become, for her, simply a statement of fact. She looked at Ezra and said, "Go find someone at your level. I'm done." And then she got up to refill her wine, and the 8 people left at that table looked at their plates, and Ezra sat quietly at the head of the table he had built and said nothing at all. What Veronica had told her friends in the weeks that followed was that she had left a man without ambition for a man who understood what she was worth. The man she had found was named Dominic Chase, a commercial real estate developer with a leased Escalade and a social profile considerably larger than his documented results. She had no idea that the man she described as having no ambition had built a private aviation company from 1 leased Cessna into 11 aircraft, with a combined market value of $12 million. What happened 14 months later, on the tarmac of Peachtree DeKalb Airport on a Saturday evening in October, is the part of this story that the 4 couples from that dinner table have not stopped discussing. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The hangar at the southeast corner of Peachtree DeKalb Airport was Ezra's favorite hour of the day, the morning shift, before the first charter departed, when the only sound was the fluorescent hum overhead and the occasional distant voice of a ground crew running a pre-departure checklist on the adjacent ramp. He arrived before his pilots. He had done this since the beginning, when there was only 1 aircraft and he flew every leg himself. The Gulfstream G450 sat in the center of the hangar with the particular composed authority of an aircraft that knew its own capabilities. Ezra walked the exterior in the deliberate, unhurried circuit he had never delegated to anyone else. Leading edge, engine nacelles, control surfaces, gear doors. Not because he distrusted his maintenance team, but because the discipline of looking at the whole machine before asking it to carry people through the air was the discipline his grandfather had instilled in him on the day of his first lesson, and he had not found a good reason to stop. His grandfather, Curtis Banks, had been the first man in their family to hold a commercial pilot's license. He had earned it in 1971. In an era when the certificate itself required a particular kind of resolve that the paperwork did not capture. He had flown freight routes for 12 years before a regional carrier took him on, and he had spent 21 years after that flying narrow bodies out of Hartsfield, with the steady precision of a man who understood that the sky was the one place nobody could tell you what you were worth until you demonstrated it by landing the aircraft. He had given Ezra his first lesson at age 14 in a rented Cessna 172 at a grass strip in Coweta County, and at the end of that lesson he had said, in the voice he used for things he intended to last, "The altitude you fly at is nobody's business until you are already up there." Ezra had been building upward for 25 years, the photograph of that Cessna, the specific aircraft from that first lesson. N7841G, a white and blue 172 with a dented spinner and a cracked seat cushion on the right side, hung in a frame on the wall of the Southeast Charter Group FBO office at the north end of the hangar. Curtis had tracked down the photo himself before he passed, had it printed and framed, and left it with a note that read simply, "This is where you started." Ezra had hung it the morning he took occupancy of the hangar. It had not moved in 9 years. Southeast Charter Group operated 11 aircraft from the PDK facility, the G450, 3 Phenom 300s, 4 King Airs, and 3 light jets for regional hops. With a full-time staff of 22 and a client roster that ran from corporate flight departments to private individuals to a federal government contract that had renewed twice without renegotiation. Ezra held a commercial pilot certificate with an AP rating. He did not tell people this at dinner parties. He did not tell people much at dinner parties, which Veronica had, for the last 2 years of their marriage, described to her friends as his primary limitation. He and Veronica had been together 8 years, married for 6. They had met at an industry networking event in Buckhead. She was in corporate marketing, sharp and visually deliberate, working the room with the specific efficiency of someone who understood which conversations were worth having. He had admired the economy of her attention. He had been slow to understand that the efficiency she brought to professional settings, she also brought to the decisions of her personal life, including the decision that Ezra was not appreciating in value at a rate she considered adequate. In the last year of the marriage, she had stopped asking about his work entirely. She had described his job to new acquaintances as aviation management, in the tone of someone describing a function that was useful but not interesting. He had not corrected her. The company's operating name was registered in his name, but its visible presence was modest. No advertising, no public profile, no social appearances. His clients did not come from visibility. They came from referrals and from the kind of reputation that accumulated quietly over years of never canceling a departure. That was not the kind of success that showed up at dinner parties. Veronica had, eventually, stopped waiting for it to. The Thursday before the dinner where she made her announcement, Ezra had returned home from a late departure delay and found Veronica on the back porch speaking to someone on her phone in the low-register voice of a person conducting a conversation they have decided they do not mind being overheard having. He did not slow his pace. He did not stop in the doorway. He heard 4 sentences, enough to understand the general shape of what was being planned, and he continued to the kitchen and made himself a glass of water and stood at the counter for a long time in the dark. He knew then what the dinner was going to be. He was right. He sat at his own table and listened to Veronica say, "Find someone at your level," and he did not respond. Because he had learned long before that the most important instrument a pilot had was situational awareness, knowing exactly where you were and where the terrain was before you made a control input. He was not going to make a control input that evening. He was going to wait until he could see the full picture. His hands did not shake. His face remained perfectly calm. The Saturday after the dinner, Ezra arrived at the hangar at 5:15 and sat in the FBO office with a Cessna photograph on the wall behind him and a fresh composition notebook open on the desk. He spent 3 hours building the documented record methodically, the way he filed a flight plan, which was to say completely and with no assumption that anyone would help him if he had left something out. He pulled 5 months of joint account statements from the shared portal. 3 transfers to a personal account Veronica had opened without his knowledge, totaling $22,400, moved in amounts that varied enough to avoid alerts, but consistent enough over 4 months to read as intentional. A credit card charge at a hotel in Sandy Springs on a Thursday, she had said, was a late client dinner. A purchase at a jewelry store on a Saturday she had been, she said, at her mother's. An Airbnb charge in a part of Buckhead he had no reason to associate with any event she had mentioned. He ran a public records search on Dominic Chase through the same database the firm used for client due diligence. The profile was the kind that impressed in a room before anyone looked closely. 4 commercial properties in the Atlanta metro, all carried with significant leveraged debt. 2 active liens from a construction dispute that had been in arbitration for 14 months. A partnership dissolution in 2021 that had resulted in a civil judgment that had not yet been fully satisfied. The leased Escalade was leased. The office in Buckhead was a shared executive suite with a reception service and a mailing address. Dominic Chase was not a man who had built something. He was a man who had borrowed against the appearance of having built something, and the borrowing had been running longer than the appearance could sustain. Ezra noted this the way he noted weather, as information relevant to what came next, not as satisfaction. He moved with the same deliberate calm that defined all of his work. He closed the notebook. He called Loretta Chance. She answered on the first ring. "How soon can you be in the office?" he said. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "Bring documentation." The altitude you fly at, he thought, was nobody's business until you were already up there. He was already up there. He just had not shown anyone the altimeter yet. Loretta Chance's office was on the 14th floor of a building in Midtown Atlanta, a space that managed to feel both orderly and completely unhurried, which was exactly the quality Loretta herself projected in every professional setting. She was 62, a financial advisor and business attorney who had handled Ezra's corporate structure since the company's first year of operation, and she reviewed the morning's folder with the focused efficiency of someone who had spent 4 decades reading financial documentation and no longer needed to slow down for any of it. She set the folder down. "The prenuptial agreement covers the company in full," she said. "All equity, all aircraft, all subsidiary operating accounts, premarital assets, fully protected. She receives the marital home and the settlement figure in the agreement." She paused. "The unauthorized transfers are recoverable and will be included in the offset calculation." She looked at Ezra with the direct attention of a woman who had a strong opinion she had decided to state. She filed a preliminary financial declaration with her attorney last week. My contact at the courthouse pulled it. She slid a photocopy across the desk. She listed your income as $240,000 a year from an aviation management position. Ezra looked at the declaration. The firm's net revenue last year was $8.4 million, Loretta said. Her figure is approximately 4% of that. She folded her hands. She does not know what she walked away from. He looked at the declaration for a moment longer. He set it down. "What is the exposure if she contests the prenuptial valuation?" he asked. "None," Loretta said. "The prenup is clean, witnessed, notarized, and documented in the corporate formation records. Any contest would be resolved in your favor in 48 hours. She picked up her pen. "I'll have the filing ready by end of week. You choose when to serve it." He thanked her. He stood and gathered his folder. Some things did not need to be rushed to be final. 2 days later, he drove to his aunt's house in Decatur, Frances Banks. His grandfather Curtis's youngest daughter, 70 years old, a retired school teacher who had been present for every significant event in Ezra's life since childhood, and who held the institutional memory of the family with the particular clarity of someone who had decided long ago that the truth was not something you softened for people who were old enough to hear it. He told her everything. She listened at her kitchen table with a cup of tea in both hands, looking at the window the way people look when they are listening more carefully than their posture suggests. When he finished, she said, "I never trusted the way that woman looked at your grandfather's photograph." She set her cup down. Not once did she ask about it. She walked past it every time she came to this house and never once asked whose plane that was or what it meant. She looked at Ezra. "Your grandfather used to say you could tell everything you needed to know about a person by what they didn't ask about." She paused. He also said, "The altitude you fly at is nobody's business, and that when the time comes and they can see how high you've been all along, you don't have to say a word. The sky says it for you." Ezra drove back to Atlanta and spent the following afternoon with the forensic accountant his firm retained for annual compliance reviews. A methodical man named Gerald, who produced documentation with the thoroughness of someone who understood that numbers, correctly organized, left no room for alternative interpretation. The authorized transfers, the concealed account, the understated financial declaration, all of it cataloged, cross-referenced, and sufficient for Loretta to file a response to any proceeding Veronica initiated that would reframe every assumption her attorney had brought to the table. The litigation package was ready by Thursday. That Thursday evening, Ezra came home, cooked dinner for himself in the house he had owned before they met, and sat in the kitchen and ate quietly. Veronica had moved her personal items to a friend's apartment 3 weeks before. The house was exactly what it had always been. A house he had owned and maintained and kept in good condition. A house that belonged to the same category as the aircraft. The hangar and the Cessna photograph, something he had built or acquired or preserved before she arrived, and that the prenuptial agreement had always confirmed was his. He ate his dinner. He washed his plate. He sat in his chair in the front room and listened to the house be quiet. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The Atlanta Aviation Industry Gala was held on the third Saturday of October at the Peachtree DeKalb Airport Event Facility, a venue that had, for the past 9 years, annually recognized the region's most significant contributors to private aviation, charter operations, and aerospace business development. Southeast Charter Group had co-sponsored the event for 6 of those years. This year, for the first time, Ezra had agreed to accept the Industry Leadership Award the Gala Committee had been offering him annually for 4 consecutive years. He had declined the previous 4 because the company did not need the visibility, and he did not need the recognition. He accepted this year because Loretta had told him, dryly, and with complete certainty, that being named publicly as the founder of a $12 million aviation company during an active divorce proceeding would have a clarifying effect on certain financial assumptions that had recently been committed to paper. Veronica was at the gala because Dominic Chase had aviation clients he cultivated through the commercial real estate industry, and his assistant had secured 2 tickets through a mutual contact in the Atlanta business community. Neither of them knew who the industry leadership honoree was. That information had not been in the invitation materials. Jade had been in Miami for 3 days on a client consultation. She was an aviation attorney and international business consultant whose firm handled regulatory compliance work for charter operators across the Southeast. And Southeast Charter Group had been one of her clients for 2 years before the professional relationship had quietly become something more personal. She was direct, specific, and entirely without pretense, and when she had asked Ezra 6 months ago what the maintenance cycle was on the G450's Apu, he had understood that this was someone who intended to know what she was dealing with before she committed to anything. He had appreciated that more than he could have easily explained. She was flying back from Miami on the SEG G450, a standard positioning flight, returning the aircraft to Atlanta after the Miami client trip. The timing aligned with the gala. Ezra had asked her to come. He had told her it was a work event with a certain significance. She had said she would be there. The aircraft was scheduled to arrive at PDK at 8:45 in the evening. The gala had been underway for an hour. Ezra arrived at the event at 7:30. He spoke to the committee chair. He accepted congratulations from 3 industry colleagues he knew well, and several he did not. He stood near the rear of the main room with a glass of water and watched the room work itself through its early evening rhythm. He saw Veronica arrive with Dominic at 8:15. She was dressed for a room she expected to command. She was scanning it with the practiced attention of someone calculating where she needed to be seen. She found the bar. She found the cluster of commercial aviation executives near the sponsor wall. She moved between them the way she moved through every social room she entered, efficiently and with awareness of who was watching. She had not yet seen Ezra. At 8:40, the event's master of ceremonies asked the room for their attention. He began with the evening's award presentation. He described the honoree as someone who had built a regional aviation institution from the ground up, whose company had flown more than 40,000 hours of safe charter operations, and whose name had become, in the Southeast private aviation community, the specific kind of reference that people offered without needing to explain why. He said the name: Southeast Charter Group. Ezra Banks. Ezra walked from the rear of the room to the front. He did not look for Veronica on the way. He accepted the award. He said 11 sentences from the lectern, thanking the committee, naming the people who had built the company with him, and acknowledging his grandfather Curtis by name and by title. He said, "I learned to fly from a man who understood that the sky does not ask for your credentials before it lets you in. It only asks whether you are prepared." He said, "I have tried to run this company the same way." He stepped away from the lectern. At that moment, through the wide glass panels of the event facility's east wall, the wall that faced the adjacent private ramp, the exterior lights caught the shape of the G450 as it turned from the taxiway toward the FBO. The Southeast Charter Group logo on the tail was visible from inside the room. The aircraft stopped. The air stairs deployed. Jade stepped off. She was not dressed for performance. She was dressed for the end of a workday. A dark jacket. A laptop bag. Her hair natural. Her bearing the specific ease of someone who knew exactly where they were going and did not require anyone to confirm it for them. The ground crew escorted her from the aircraft toward the facility entrance. Through the glass wall, the G450 sat behind her, with the SEG logo turned toward the room. Ezra met her at the entrance. He had heard that Veronica had been standing near the east glass wall with Dominic when the aircraft taxied in, that she had watched the logo become visible as the tail turned, had heard the honoree's name announced 6 minutes before, and had understood the full geometry of the moment at approximately the same time the air stairs reached their extended position. He did not see her face. He did not need to. Someone who had been at that dinner table 6 years ago, the one where Veronica had told him to find someone at his level, was standing 12 feet away when Jade walked through the entrance and when Ezra moved to meet her. That person told him later, with the specific quality of someone reporting something they had witnessed and could not quite believe. She did not move. She just stood there. Dominic said something to her and she did not appear to hear it. She just stood there. Ezra brought Jade a glass of water. He introduced her to the committee chair. He placed his hand at the small of her back and stood beside her in the room that had just confirmed, publicly and without argument, what his grandfather had always known. The altitude you fly at is nobody's business until you are already up there. The sky had spoken. He had nothing left to add. 8 months later, Ezra Banks accepted delivery of a 12th aircraft, a Phenom 300E, the most fuel-efficient in the light jet category, registered to Southeast Charter Group, and painted in the company's navy and white livery at the paint shop in Texas before being flown to PDK. He was on the ramp when it arrived, in the same Carhartt jacket he wore to the hangar every morning, and he walked the exterior in the same deliberate circuit he had performed on every aircraft the company had ever taken delivery of. The litigation had concluded in May. Veronica received the marital home and the settlement amount specified in the prenuptial agreement. She received no interest in the company, no portion of the fleet, and no share of the operating accounts. Her attorney had contested the prenuptial valuation once and withdrawn the contest 48 hours later, which was the time frame Loretta had predicted. Veronica relocated to a smaller apartment in Midtown and took a senior marketing position at a consumer brand firm. Her sister sent Ezra a text he did not respond to. He did not wish her harm. He had nothing left in that account. Dominic Chase's commercial property portfolio had, by the following spring, lost 2 of its 4 Atlanta holdings to foreclosure proceedings triggered by the lenders on the arbitration liens. His shared executive suite office had downgraded to a smaller configuration. His 3rd commercial property was listed for sale at a price that reflected a seller under timeline pressure. Ezra heard this through a mutual contact in the Atlanta commercial real estate community and noted it the way he noted turbulence forecasts, as information relevant to other people's flights, not his. The Cessna photograph had been moved when Southeast Charter Group completed construction of a new FBO facility on the south ramp in the spring, a longer building with a proper client lounge and a glass front that faced the active runway. The photograph was hung in the lobby, the first thing a client saw when they walked in. Curtis Banks had given his grandson a first lesson in a rented Cessna on a grass strip in Coweta County. The grandson had built a company with a $12 million fleet from that single afternoon. The photograph said what no brochure needed to say. He had met Jade's parents in August, her father a retired federal judge, her mother a university dean, both of them the kind of people who asked direct questions and listened to the full answer without interruption. Jade herself asked questions the same way. She had been to the hangar 17 times in the past 8 months and had never once needed to be told where anything was after the first visit. One morning in November, Ezra arrived at the hangar at 5:15 and did his walk-around on the G450 in the dark before the ground lights came up, the way he had always done, and then stood at the end of the circuit and looked at the aircraft in the quiet of the early morning. The swept lines of it, the tail with the company logo, the specific stillness of a machine at rest that was designed for movement. He thought about his grandfather standing at the edge of a grass strip in Coweta County. He thought about a dinner table and 8 people looking at their plates. He thought about a woman standing near a glass wall, not moving. He turned and walked back toward the hangar and the light of the FBO office, and the photograph on the lobby wall and the day's first flight plan waiting on his desk. The altitude you fly at, Curtis Banks had said, is nobody's business until you are already up there. He had been up there for a long time. He was free. He was airborne. He was already home. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.